It's not a question of whether Hitler will come to power, but when. By the autumn of 1932, that was the unspoken truth haunting Germany. The real question was no longer about stopping Adolf Hitler, but about how long the political system could survive before collapsing under its own weight. Germany was no longer governed from parliament. Power had shifted behind closed doors, into executive offices, emergency decrees, and secret deals between conservative elites who believed they could control the very force they had helped unleash. The Reichstag still met, but it no longer ruled. After the July 1932 elections, Parliament became paralyzed. The Nazi Party, now the largest bloc, blocked any initiative that did not hand them total power. The Communists did the same from the opposite extreme. Votes meant nothing. Speeches changed nothing. German democracy technically still existed, but it no longer functioned. Chancellor Franz von Papen governed without a majority, relying entirely on President Paul von Hindenburg's signature and the constant use of Article 48, emergency powers that bypassed Parliament. Each decree weakened the Constitution a little more, hollowing out the Weimar Republic from within. In November 1932, Germany voted again, its third national election in less than a year. The country was exhausted. Political violence continued. Public faith in democracy was shattered. The results appeared on the surface to weaken Hitler. The Nazi Party lost nearly 2 million votes, falling to 33.1%. Yet they remained the largest party. The Communists gained even more ground. The political center collapsed entirely. Many observers believed the Hitler phenomenon was fading. That belief would prove catastrophic. The Nazis no longer needed to win elections. They only needed access to power from above. Behind the scenes, conservative elites began their fatal miscalculation. Franz von Papen believed Hitler could be used, controlled, restrained, neutralized within a cabinet dominated by conservatives. He won't be the master, they said. He'll be the instrument. General Kurt von Schleicher attempted another strategy, splitting the Nazi Party, isolating Hitler, attracting so-called moderates. He failed. No stable government could be formed without the Nazis, and Hitler knew it. Hitler refused compromise. He rejected the vice-chancellorship. He refused secondary ministries. His demand was absolute and repeated without hesitation. Full control of the chancellorship, authority over the government, and new elections. Every refusal from Hindenburg only delayed the inevitable. Every failed maneuver by the elites brought Germany closer to collapse. Meanwhile, the SA returned to the streets, less visible, but just as violent. The message was unmistakable. Without Hitler, there would be no peace. By January 1933, the system was exhausted. Papen had failed. Schleicher had failed. There was no majority, no stability, no alternative. Worn down and under immense pressure, President Hindenburg gave in. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, not through a coup, not through civil war, but through a legal decision within a democratic system. Only 3 of the 11 ministers were Nazis. The elites believed they had won. They were wrong. In 1932, Germany still had a chance to choose a different path. Instead, it chose emergency decrees over consensus, order over democracy, fear over institutions. The vote did not create the dictatorship. The slow destruction of democracy from within did. Hitler did not seize power. He was handed it. And when the Reichstag later burned, when political parties were banned, when repression became law, many would look back at 1932 as a year when everything could still have been stopped and wasn't. With Hitler inside the government, many Germans believed the worst was over, that political chaos had finally stabilized. In reality, what began was not a solution, but the final phase of collapse. From his first day as chancellor, Hitler did not govern like a normal leader. He governed like a man who knew time was on his side. Week by week, he used fear, violence, and legality to advance, while his enemies clung to the illusion that rules still mattered. Street violence did not disappear. It became more selective, more organized, more intimidating. SA units patrolled working-class neighborhoods. Communist meetings were attacked. Independent newspapers were threatened, all under the pretext of maintaining order. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building went up in flames. Who started the fire mattered less than how it was used. Within hours, Hitler framed it as proof of a communist conspiracy to destroy Germany. Hindenburg signed a decree for protection of the people and the state, suspending freedom of the press, assembly, and expression. Germany ceased to be a true rule of law state in practice, even if it remained one on paper. Thousands of political opponents were arrested. Improvised concentration camps began to fill. Everything was declared legal. Everything was declared temporary. Elections were held in March 1933 under intimidation, arrests, propaganda, and violence. Even then, the Nazis failed to win an absolute majority. It no longer mattered. With communists excluded from parliament, Hitler passed the Enabling Act on March 23rd, transferring legislative power to the government. The vote took place surrounded by armed men. The Reichstag became meaningless. The Weimar Republic ended without a single shot fired inside Parliament. In the months that followed, political parties were banned, trade unions dissolved, regional governments dismantled, and the state fused with the Nazi Party. Exhausted by years of crisis, many Germans accepted the new order as a lesser evil, mistaking stability for safety. When Hindenburg died in August 1934 and Hitler merged the presidency with the chancellorship, demanding a personal oath of loyalty from the army, the process that began in 1932 was complete. Looking back, the decisive moment was not one election, one law, or one fire. It was the accumulation of compromises, the normalization of authoritarianism, and the belief that democracy could be suspended in order to save it. History shows that dictatorships do not always arrive promising terror. Often, they arrive promising order, legality, and quick solutions. And when society realizes what is lost, there is no institution left strong enough to stop it. What followed was not chaos. It was something far more dangerous: normalization. In the weeks after the Enabling Act, Germany did not look like a country collapsing into dictatorship. There were no tanks in the streets of Berlin, no mass executions, no sudden abolition of everyday life. Shops remained open, trains ran on time, newspapers still printed headlines. For many ordinary Germans, daily routines continued almost unchanged. And that was precisely the point. Power was no longer seized violently. It was absorbed quietly. Hitler understood something fundamental about modern states. Fear works best when it feels legal. The Nazi leadership did not announce the end of democracy. They claimed to be protecting it. Every action was framed as temporary, necessary, defensive. Emergency measures were justified as responses to enemies, communists, traitors, internal saboteurs, real or imagined. The language of crisis replaced the language of rights. Within weeks, political opposition was dismantled piece by piece. The Communist Party was effectively destroyed first. Its deputies were arrested, forced underground, or driven into exile. Social Democrats were next, harassed, banned, silenced. Other parties dissolved themselves voluntarily, hoping compliance might spare them. It never did. By July 1933, Germany was officially a one-party state. The transformation was swift, but not sudden enough to provoke mass resistance. Trade unions were dissolved and replaced with the German Labor Front. Workers were told this was not repression, but unity. Strikes were banned not as a punishment, but as a patriotic necessity. Employers and employees were now partners in the national community. Class conflict, the Nazis claimed, had been overcome. In reality, workers lost their last means of resistance. Federalism collapsed next. The German states, once semi-autonomous, were brought under centralized control. Governors were replaced by Nazi loyalists. Local administrations were purged. Judges were pressured to interpret the law according to political loyalty rather than legal principle. The rule of law did not vanish overnight. It was bent until it served power. This was the new Germany. Not lawless, but law dominated by ideology. Meanwhile, the propaganda machine went into overdrive. Joseph Goebbels understood that violence alone could not sustain a regime. People had to believe. Radios became cheaper and more widespread. Speeches filled public squares. Newspapers echoed the same narratives. Germany, the public was told, had been humiliated, betrayed, weakened, but was now rising again, and many wanted to believe it. Years of economic collapse, hyperinflation, mass unemployment, and political paralysis had exhausted the population. Stability, even authoritarian stability, felt like relief. For the first time in years, the government appeared decisive. Projects were launched. Public works expanded. The illusion of recovery took hold. Critics warned of the cost, but their voices were drowned out by applause. Fear and hope worked together. Violence did not disappear. It became selective. Concentration camps, initially improvised and chaotic, became institutionalized. They were presented not as tools of terror, but as facilities for protective custody. The language mattered. Prisoners were not arrested. They were secured. Rights were not abolished. They were temporarily suspended. Every word softened the reality. Foreign observers were divided. Some warned that Germany was sliding into dictatorship. Others insisted Hitler would moderate once in power. Diplomatic reports described him as radical but constrained. They underestimated him completely. Hitler was not improvising. He was executing a long-term strategy. By mid-1933, the Nazi state had achieved something remarkable: near total political control, without triggering a civil war. This was not because Germans universally supported Nazism. It was because resistance had been fragmented, isolated, and neutralized before it could organize. The army watched closely. The Reichswehr, Germany's professional military, had remained officially apolitical throughout the Weimar years. Its leadership distrusted Hitler, despised the SA, and feared revolutionary chaos. But they feared communism more, and Hitler knew it. He reassured the generals that he respected the army, that he would rebuild it, expand it, restore Germany's military honor. Then came the bargain. In June 1934, the Nazi regime turned inward. The SA, once Hitler's street army, had become a liability. Its leader, Ernst Röhm, demanded a second revolution, one that would threaten the military and conservative elites. Hitler made his choice. During the Night of the Long Knives, Röhm and dozens of others were executed without trial. The message was clear. Loyalty to Hitler mattered more than ideology. The army took notice. When President Hindenburg died in August 1934, the final barrier disappeared. Hitler merged the offices of Chancellor and President, declaring himself Führer of Germany. The army swore a personal oath, not to the Constitution, not to the state, but to Adolf Hitler himself. This moment, more than any election or law, sealed Germany's fate. Power was now personal. From this point on, opposition was no longer political. It was existential. The state and the party became inseparable. Loyalty was measured not by actions, but by belief. The Gestapo expanded. Surveillance became normalized. Denunciation turned neighbor against neighbor. Silence became survival. And yet, many Germans still believed they were safe. The early victims were outsiders: communists, socialists, Jews, political dissidents. For the majority, repression felt distant, abstract. The selective persecution created a fatal illusion that obedience guaranteed security. It did not. Foreign policy followed the same pattern. Hitler tested limits incrementally. Germany withdrew from the League of Nations. It rearmed in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The Rhineland was remilitarized. Each step was framed as reasonable, defensive, justified. Each provocation was met with hesitation abroad. France and Britain protested, but did nothing. The lesson was learned. Aggression worked. By the late 1930s, Germany was no longer hiding its ambitions. Austria was annexed. Czechoslovakia was dismantled. Diplomacy gave way to threats. Appeasement replaced resistance. The same pattern that had destroyed German democracy now unfolded on an international scale. When war finally came in 1939, it did not feel sudden. It felt inevitable. The Second World War was not born overnight. It was a result of years of calculated risk, unchallenged escalation, and institutional collapse. The path from the Reichstag elections of 1932 to the invasion of Poland was direct, even if many refused to see it. And when the machinery of war turned fully, The consequences were beyond anything imagined. What began as political paralysis became global catastrophe. What started with emergency decrees ended with genocide. The system that believed it could control Hitler discovered too late that it had empowered him instead. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. A democracy that governs by decree. A parliament that exists but does not function. Elites who believe they can manipulate extremists. A population exhausted enough to trade freedom for order. These are not uniquely German failures. They are universal vulnerabilities. The story of Germany in 1932 is not just a historical case study. It is a reminder. Democracies rarely collapse all at once. They erode slowly, legally, incrementally, until resistance becomes impossible. Hitler did not destroy the Weimar Republic alone. He exploited its weaknesses. He used its laws. He benefited from its compromises. And when the moment came, there was nothing left to stop him. That is the final lesson of 1932. Not that evil arrives suddenly, but that it is often invited, step by step, decision by decision, until the door is wide open, and no one remembers who turned the handle.